Hello, I'm Malcolm. Welcome to edition 1966 of the Enfield Talking Newspaper. With me on the reading team for Thursday the 14th of August 2014 are John, Katherin and Audrey, with Colin on the controls. And the items we'll be reading are the copyright of our local newspapers, the Enfield Gazette and Advertiser and the Enfield Independent. This week's local stories include a day of play, hearing aid protests, unfair to make us pay for the riots, and call for a clampdown on races. But we've got to start with an apology today. John?
Yes, last week there was a problem at Enfield sorting office, which meant the tapes were not sent out until Wednesday. We are not sure why this happened, as we've been unable to get any reply from the sorting office. The tape was recorded, copied and sent off as normal, but something, we don't yet know what, got in the way of its being sent to you on time. So on behalf of everyone at Enfield Talking Newspaper, we'd like to say sorry.
Sorry.
Thanks, John. OK, well, before we go to the papers, we've got one or two reminders and special announcements.
Malcolm, before we get into the notices, I believe there are some changes coming up about the way we bring people the Enfield Talking Newspaper. Can we tell our listeners what's happening?
Well, sure, Katherin. Phillip Dawson, our chairman, has asked us to tell everyone about it. In short, Enfield Talking Newspaper is going digital.
So what does that mean?
Well, let's think for a moment about how we do things now. You and I are sitting in a room at the Civic Centre in Enfield speaking into microphones.
Yep.
And at the end of the table is Colin, who's recording the whole thing.
Yep.
And to do that, he's using a machine that records onto tape cassette, just like the cassettes we send out to our listeners. Halfway through the recording, he turns over the cassette, just like our listeners do when they're listening.
So at the end of our recording session, we end up with one cassette with the talking newspaper recorded on it. How does it get to our listeners from there?
Well, the next thing that happens is this one cassette is taken to Community House in Edmonton, where, on a Friday night, the team use special machines to copy onto other cassettes, enough cassettes for our listeners. They put them into envelopes, and if the Royal Mail does their stuff, the listeners get a tape in the post sometime in the following week, and they listen to the cassette by playing it on their tape machine.
So, how is digital different?
Well, when you record onto a cassette and copy it, you always get a slight loss in quality. If there's a physical fault on the tape, that will also spoil the recording. And in the end, the recording can only be played on a cassette player. When you record digitally, you make a file like the file stored on computers that can be used to print documents or show pictures. Only in this case, you make a special file that makes sounds. Whenever you make a copy, the file is exactly the same, so there's no loss of quality. Another advantage is that this file can be copied, stored and played on many different devices and distributed in many different ways. It's much more versatile. For example, all BBC studios are now digital. Hardly anyone uses tape anymore. Music is mostly played on digital devices like CD players, iPods, computers and even smartphones. So cassettes are now seen as old-fashioned technology that people don't use anymore. Even when you make a long-distance telephone call, the sound you make is converted into a digital signal and then converted back into sound at the other end.
What has this trend to digital meant for the Enfield Talking Newspaper?
Well, a number of listeners have left us because they've gone digital and can no longer play the cassettes that we send out. And we believe that a lot of people who are losing their sight are missing out on what we have to offer because our use of cassettes is putting them off taking up our service.
Is this because most people just don't have working cassette players anymore?
Well, that's right. And this leads to another problem. The equipment needed to record cassettes and speed copy them is becoming more costly to repair and service. We even have experienced problems buying new cassettes to replace the ones that wear out.
Going digital will change the way we record the talking newspaper, and it will change the way we get it to people. What about CDs? Aren't those digital? Many people have CD players.
Well, they are digital, but you either have to use CDs once and throw them away, which is expensive in the long run, or you use rewritable ones, which have a limited life and can be complicated to process. Some talking newspapers have used CDs, but we're sure we've found a better solution.
OK, so how will listeners continue to get their Enfield Talking newspaper?
Well, before Christmas this year, we're going to stop using tape cassettes altogether.
Wow. That will be a bit of a shock for some people. What does this mean for our listeners?
Well, we think that most of our listeners will prefer to continue getting something in the post that they can physically touch. So instead of cassettes, we're going to start using memory sticks.
I'm sure some of our listeners will know, but for those who don't, what are memory sticks?
Well, memory sticks are small electronic devices about the size of your little finger that store digital files, and that includes sound files. They were designed to plug into computers, but they can also be used on devices such as recent versions of the Concerto and Daisy players that will already be familiar to some listeners.
OK, you've told us why we need to make the change, but are there any benefits from using memory sticks instead of cassettes?
Well, yes, there are. The cassettes we use can only record 1 hour of material, but with memory sticks we can make a much wider range of recordings available because they store much, much more.
What sort of things?
Well, we'll be able to provide more information each week, including recordings of national magazines from the wide selection available via the RNIB and national talking newspapers and magazines. We'll be consulting our listeners about what they would like sent to them.
And how will this affect our listeners on a practical level?
Well, over the past few months, we've talked it through with our listeners' representatives and given it a lot of thought. In one way, things won't change at all. The memory sticks are simple to use and will be returned and reused each week, just as the cassettes are.
But quite a lot of people won't be familiar with memory sticks and won't know how to play them.
Well, we've also been thinking hard about this with our listeners' representatives, and we think our listeners fall into 4 main groups. The first group will be people, admittedly not many at the moment, who are already listening to a specially created digital version of the Enfield Talking newspaper delivered over the internet. They're using YouTube, SoundCloud, or the British Wireless for the Blind Fund's Sonata service. Nothing will change for them, although they might notice an improvement in the sound quality. The second group will be listeners who are already receiving digital sound files on memory sticks from other people and be confident in using them. For example, they may have recent versions of Concerto or Daisy players, or be used to plugging memory sticks into computers and playing sound files. They'll be well able to cope with the change and may even wonder what all the fuss is about. The third group is comprised of listeners who do have devices that can play memory sticks, such as the later versions of Concerto or Daisy players, but they don't realise they can play them. And even if they know they could play them, they won't be sure how to go about it. And the fourth group is of people who don't have devices that can play memory sticks at all.
Really, it's the third and fourth groups that we need to help with the change. The people who have suitable devices to play memory sticks but are not confident about using them, and the people who don't have devices that can play memory sticks at all.
That's right, Katherin.
What are we going to do for those people?
Well, to support our listeners properly, we need to know who would like to receive advice, support and help with equipment. To help us get this information, we need our listeners to respond to us.
Why can't we just ring people up and ask them?
Surprisingly, we don't have up-to-date telephone numbers for all our listeners.
What do we want people to do?
Well, from next week, and for a period of 3 weeks, listeners will find a card secured with a rubber band to each cassette they receive. If people already have the facility to play sound files on memory sticks and are confident about using them, they don't need to do anything. They can just throw the card away, and we don't need to bother them. In time, they will just start getting memory sticks, and they'll know what to do. But if they have a device and don't know if it can play memory sticks or are not sure how to use it, we'd like them to send back the card when they return the cassette. Then we'll know that we need to contact them to offer some practical help.
And what if they don't have a suitable device at all?
Then we'd also like them to return the card, and we'll contact them to make sure they can continue to listen using a suitable device.
How do they return the card again?
It's simple. They just put it into the packet when they return the cassette, and we'll know to contact them.
So when people return the card, what will happen?
If we have an up-to-date telephone number for them, we'll call them. If we don't have an up-to-date phone number, we'll send them a special tape suggesting how they can get in touch.
And what happens when we make contact with people?
The first thing we'll do is help them find out if they already have a suitable device for playing memory sticks. If they think it would be helpful, we'll even visit them to show them how to use it.
And if they don't have a suitable device?
Well, do you remember when we were at the annual general meeting, there was a little device there called a boombox?
Yeah, it was very small and neat. It looked easy to use and the sound was really very good. If you wanted to, you could even connect it to your existing hi-fi system.
That's the one. For people who don't have a suitable device like the latest Daisy or Concerto players, which play sound files on memory sticks, we have 2 offers. There's a special purchase offer, which means you can own a new boombox that plays memory sticks for just £10.
That's good, Malcolm, but money's tight for many people, and even £10 can seem a lot.
Well, that brings me to the second offer. If people are on means-tested benefits, we can offer a free loan of a boombox.
So, if people already have a suitable device for memory sticks, we'll show them how to use it, and if they don't, we'll make sure that one way or another they get an easy-to-use boombox.
That's right.
When's this all going to happen, Malcolm?
Well, our aim is to complete the changeover by Christmas, so we need people to contact us as soon as possible by simply returning the card with their cassette.
And we will start sending out the cards next week.
That's right, and I'm sure there'll be a reminder in the talking newspaper next week too.
It sounds as if it's all been carefully planned, but not everybody likes change, do they, Malcolm?
Well, it's worth remembering that at one time, the Enfield Talking newspaper was recorded on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and it was taken around to listeners' houses in the front basket of a bicycle. And then came along cassette players, which were new technology at the time, and we had to get used to them. But it's true, change doesn't always seem a good thing, especially if you're getting on a bit and have been used to doing things in a particular way. But after all the discussion and thought that's gone into it, everyone at the Enfield Talking newspaper is confident that the use of memory sticks will allow us to improve the service we offer our listeners. So we really want to make this transition as smooth as possible so that everyone is totally comfortable with it.
And all people have to do is to return the card next week.
That's right.
What if they want to speak to someone now?
There's no problem, Katherin. They can pick up the phone and speak to Diane, our listeners' representative, or to Phillip, our chairman. They'll be happy to listen to what people have to say and help with any concerns.
Have you got the numbers handy?
Yeah, I'll give them now and also at the end of side 2. Diane de Jersey is on 020 8805 6578. That's 020 8805 6578. Philip Dawson has a mobile number. It's 07843 445 963. That's 07843 445 963. And as I said, we'll give those numbers again at the end of side 2. Okay, well, after that, we better do the announcements. Audrey, you've got something about Enfield Vision.
I have indeed. Enfield Vision will be holding their next forum meeting on Monday, the 1st of September, from 7 p.m. until 9 p.m. at the Park Avenue Disability Centre. The speaker will be Terry Okoro of the Enfield Clinical Commissioning Group, and the meeting will discuss ways to make patient and clinical information more accessible to people who are blind and partially sighted.
Okay, Katherin, we were talking about Sonata before when we were talking about going digital. You've got something about that as well?
Yes, Malcolm. Enfield Talking newspaper is now available on Sonata. Sonata is an internet radio service developed by the British Wireless for the Blind Fund, specifically for use by blind and partially sighted people. Sonata devices are available to buy from the British Wireless for the Blind Fund and require a broadband connection. Listeners who are registered blind or partially sighted, are UK residents and in receipt of means-tested benefits qualify for a Sonata device on free loan. For more information, please telephone the British Wireless for the Blind Fund on 01622 747 757. That's 01622 747 757. To experience a Sonata in action, please get in touch with your listener's representative, Diane de Jersey, on 020 8805 6578. That's 020 8805 6578.
And now, at last, here is John with the first news item.
Right, and this is down to the lovely weather too. Council chiefs got in touch with their inner child at a play day in Enfield last week. Deputy Mayor Patricia Ekechi joined hundreds of children in Enfield Town Park in Cecil Road on Wednesday for a day of family fun. The free event which was part of National Play Day, kicked off a summer of play in the borough. As well as allowing children to have fun, bouncing, dancing, skipping, running and general mayhem are vital to keeping them healthy. Youngsters enjoyed bouncy castles, arts and crafts stalls, face painting, games and dance workshops, while the Mayor helped them to release hundreds of balloons. Aoife Orhan, Enfield Council's Cabinet Member for Education and Children's Services, said, "This was a special day for celebrating our children's right to play. I also hope Enfield's children take full advantage of the free activities at centres throughout the borough for the rest of the summer."
Campaigners staged a protest outside the offices of a charity on Monday, demonstrating against an advertising campaign for hearing aids, which they say undermines the NHS. Members of the Enfield Over 50s Forum, which tackles issues affecting the elderly, picketed the offices of the Enfield branch of Age UK in Nags Head Road, Ponders End, in protest against the charity advertising for paid-for hearing aids in partnership with private firm UK Hearing Care. The forum members are furious about an advertising leaflet in which Age UK describes itself as your first choice for hearing solutions. Monty Meth, the forum's life president, said the charity was wrong to encourage people to pay for something they could get on the NHS for free. He said, "We cannot understand why Age UK is seeking to persuade older people to spend hard-earned money buying a hearing aid from a for-profit company, which cannot possibly offer them the continuous aftercare service provided by Chase Farm Hospital's audiology department. This is another threat to the NHS, which is being encouraged by Age UK, and we believe this is not the charity's function. The company selling the devices, UK Hearing Care Management Services Limited, is a subsidiary of UK Hearing Care, and was formed in January 2013 when it committed to raising £100,000 for Age UK in exchange for the ability to use the charity's brand. Hugh Ford, Managing Director of Retail, Trading and Training at Age UK, said, "We recognise that hearing difficulties can have a devastating impact, so we seek not to compete with local NHS services, but to provide choice and widen the opportunity for older people looking for hearing care. Age UK Hearing Aids has been established to encourage older people to seek help with hearing problems, and all profits are gift-aided back to help fund our charitable activity."
A shopkeeper whose pharmacy was ransacked during the 2011 riots has used the third anniversary of the Troubles to warn of the drastic impact of planned government changes to the ways in which victims of such disturbances are compensated. During the riots of August 2011, Deepak Shah spent a night barricaded in his shop, Health Fair Chemist, in Southby Road, Enfield Town, while Yobs smashed the windows and tried to break in. The damage cost him £22,000 in lost trade and repairs, but he was able to claim compensation under the 1886 Riot Damages Act. This week, Mr. Shah spoke out against government plans to repeal and replace the law, under which police authorities are liable for damage caused to property during riots. The proposals set out in a consultation document include limiting the businesses which can claim to those with an annual turnover of less than £2 million. And businesses will only be able to claim for damages, not loss of trade and profits. Mr. Shah said, "Whether a riot occurs is the fault of businesses, whether a riot occurs is not the fault of the businesses. It's a policing matter if things get out of control. We already pay taxes, so there is no reason the government should not cover the damage and consequential losses, which are usually far higher than the actual damage caused. These plans will mean insurance premiums go up dramatically, or insurers will refuse to cover the risk entirely, meaning that businesses will be less likely to move to areas at risk of riots, which means a further downward spiral, as there will be less employment." The Metropolitan Police was taken to court last year after refusing to pay compensation for stock destroyed in the fire at the Sonny Distribution Centre in Solo Way, Enfield Lock, during the riots. It only agreed to pay out after a 2-year battle. Enfield North MP Nick Dubois said he would oppose the changes, adding, "It's good to tidy the act up so it's more up to date, but riots are so rare that asking businesses to plan for these on an annual basis and incurring substantial costs as a result is unreasonable. It would not be right to shift the cost of public disorder onto individuals and businesses." A spokeswoman for the Home Office said the Act needed updating. She added, "Our recent consultation provided an opportunity to ensure it meets the needs of any future compensation claims. We will now consider proposals to the consultation and will decide which proposals to take forward in due course."
The weekly car races along a road in Enfield that police insisted they were clamping down on last year have reached new, unacceptable levels, according to a councillor. The races are often referred to as meets by the speedsters who gather in car parks of industrial centres along the Great Cambridge Road. Now, Chase Ward councillor Nick Dines has called on the Mayor of London to step in and do something before someone gets killed. In a letter sent to Mayor Boris Johnson last week, Mr Dines said, "Occasional policing activity does take place, but it is clear that this needs to be sustained and on every weekend, with fines and prosecutions being handed out to these drivers who are making people's lives a misery." Speaking to the Advertiser about the issue, the councillor who was elected in May said he was now hopeful that even if local police resources were stretched, City Hall might step into the breach. "If we can secure mayoral backing for putting proper resources into clamping down on this menace, then it would of course help," said Mr Dines. "The last thing we want is for a driver at one of these meets to lose control of their car and slam it into one of the houses along that road." Police Sergeant Stuart Gill from Southbury Ward said, "Most of the people who go there don't speed. They are mostly car enthusiasts. Most of them are law-abiding citizens. The A10 is the jurisdiction of Transport for London, who at one time had an idea to put in average speed cameras. If they did that, it would solve the problem instantly." Mr Dines added, "Enfield Police are doing their best, but they just don't have the resources." In response to calls for action, London's Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Stephen Greenhall, said, "I'm very concerned that residents are suffering from this type of behaviour. The Metropolitan Police have said that they take this very seriously, but I will be raising it with the Commissioner to ensure that it is being dealt with appropriately to give local people the peace they deserve."
A nightclub had its licence suspended after a man was stabbed and another shot during a late-night brawl. Golden Palace in Herbert Road, Upper Edmonton, narrowly avoided being closed permanently following the incident, which took place 3 hours after it was meant to have been closed. The police are treating the shooting and stabbing as attempted murder. At a licence committee hearing last Wednesday, councillors told the premises holder, Edis Hatsunk, that his licence is suspended for 3 months while numerous conditions are met by the club. The committee heard that the incident took place 2.5 hours after a birthday party at the club was supposed to finish. Police arrived at the scene at approximately 6:20 a.m. to find numerous people still in the club. James Radkin, representing the police, said the club's clientele has led it to become a stigma for gang culture. The committee also heard that on the night of the scuffle, CCTV was not in use and could not be provided as evidence. Mr Rankin added, "The fact that the CCTV was not working during the night of the incident is a disaster and a major failing of the owner." Mr Rankin also went on to condemn the failings at Golden Palace, highlighting that many of the staff were not fully trained and that when the police attempted to contact Mr Hatsunk for questioning, he was ill on a number of days. Representing Golden Palace, Roderick James told the committee that private events are occasional. He said, The Golden Palace's core business is in wedding functions and wakes, and very rarely hosts these types of events, twice a month maximum. So it would be disingenuous to say this is a stigma. We say that this incident is a one-off. My clients have held a licence since 2008, and not once has there been a serious issue. To revoke the licence would be unjustified. Committee Chairman, Councillor Derek Levy, issued the suspension of the licence and conditions that need to be met by Golden Palace in order to reopen. These include the installation of a search arch to detect weapons being taken into a club, regular checks to ensure all staff are qualified, no entry to the club 1 hour before closing time, and hand searches on customers before entering the club. Speaking after the ruling, Mr. James said, "My clients are disappointed with the decision, but they take the committee's conditions very seriously and will be taking them on board." Mr. James did not rule out the possibility of an appeal to the decision made by the committee.
A man has accused a rail operator of using bullying tactics to force residents to pay more money to rent land. Tony Anthony, 64, of Woodland Way, Winchmore Hill, has been paying rent on 50 foot of land at the bottom of his garden for the past 24 years. It has risen over time from £50 to the current figure of £96.32, which he paid in June. However, the retired bank manager received a letter from Network Rail on July the 2nd advising him that the rent is below the land's current market value, and therefore the company was proposing an increase to £500 plus VAT, meaning an annual rent close to £600. "It's out of order," said an angry Mr. Anthony. "How have they come to the conclusion the land is worth that? In my opinion, they're looking to make money off old age pensioners." The letter states residents can opt out of the new agreement, but Mr. Anthony claimed he was not consulted about the proposal for the wasteland, which is no use to anyone else. He said, "I don't like the way Network Rail are trying to bully their customers. This isn't the first time they've come up with schemes they've not thought through properly. I've spoken to a few of my neighbours, and we all agree that we will not pay the extra fees," added Mr. Anthony. A Network Rail spokeswoman said, "Every penny Network Rail receives in rent is reinvested into improving the railway for passengers, which is why it's important that rents reflect the current market value. Many of the agreements residents have on this road to lease part of their gardens from Network Rail date back to British Rail days, and the new charges reflect the appropriate level of rent. Some properties of this road already are paying the current market value. All properties have been given at least 4 months' notice and have the option not to proceed and return the land to Network Rail." Well, that brings us to the end of side 1. So please stop your machine, take out the cassette, turn it over, and start side 2.